Hi, students. I want to take a few minutes to go over our book because if you're thinking, how does it help me? I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the semester that it's a really great book. So, one of the things that I want to go by is like, I want to show you. I would go ahead and download it. And let me scroll down. I don't know if you have taken the time to take a look at it. I have some really great examples on typography layout, like these right here. They have good examples on packaging. This is one of my favorite examples. Let me go back to it. Give me a second. This. So if you look at these different covers, the name is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This and this is the exact same type layout. What they did here, they changed the background. But you can see how these are both work well, whether it's in white or red. They justify the text left and they put the paragraph information on here. When you look at the next example, here's another way of communicating the same idea or getting the point across. Laying it out, opening in Photoshop and distorting the letters over here, or then adding these red lines across the letters to make a point. On the next set of examples, look how they use the hands. And again, same layout of the typography, but the background change. So you can see how these are 6 different ideas of how trying to make something work. So if you go back to the example that we've touched on before, so you're doing that layout for a client. You ask them questions. Who is it for? Who is the target audience? Where is it going to be shown? Is this going at a college? Is this going, let's say, on the walls of Deep Ellum? Is this going in a hotel? Where are you gonna display this poster so you start learning your audience? Once you get all this information and then get everything about the organization, you decide to do your layouts. You may not show them the 6 layouts, you may narrow it down to 3, but you're definitely going to do this many to kind of play with what works and what doesn't work. So let's say the typography looks great, but it just needs a little essence of something. So this is again a really good example of that variation. Then here's an interference. Same type here. They went out and added another layer. The paragraph information, same layout, but instead they made the white lines red. The placement is the same. The only thing that changed, the color of the letters. They added another effect of red overlay on top of these. So now you can show the client and say, okay, well, which one do you like better? Here are 2 other examples. Same font. I think you can tell that it's the same typeface. But then here, they play with putting an image inside the typography, which in here, they went ahead and cut off pieces of the letters and take them out. And you achieve this, in case you're wondering, in Illustrator really well, because you can create the type, bring it in, create the type, create the layout, create outlines, then go in and delete the pieces of the letters that you don't want. But you can see again how these little variations can give it a completely different look. And let me scroll down a little bit more. I mean, this is such a great book. I think you're really gonna enjoy it. Here's a really good explanation of point, line, and plane with examples. I do recommend that you read through this, and they give you examples of what actually, as an example, as point, right? So a point can be literally a dot on a paper, but if you were gonna take, let's say that you were gonna take your phone, and I do this assignment in the fall. So you were gonna take your phone and your camera, and I'd say to you, go give me examples of point, line, and plane by just showing me your photography. So here's an example of point, like the dots on the, happen especially in downtown, on the stoplights. That's a good example of point. See the drain in the sink is a good example of point. Here they use these two kind of dots or openings in a building. That's also an example of point. Let's say like the top of the fire hydrant, or like the top of the, if you're standing literally bird's eye view, right on top of where they open up the water in the ground with the key, and you see that circle. But if you were gonna put your phone on top of it and look at it and then take a photo, center it in that photo, that would be an example of point. Then then we also have, here's example of line, cables, and a electric cables that you can see on the road, shadows that create this effects. You can also, here's an interesting example, and it's a really good example. The line between where the cement and the grass is. So this line right here, that's an example of point. Look at the shadows created this line, an example of point. So that would be, let's say that you look at, you take a picture of a fence, like the fence of your house. That would be a good example of line. I think I said point over here. I meant line. Excuse me. But you just gonna have to think about it. It's a good example of line, good example of line, good example of line. If you're standing in any of the campuses, depending on how you stand, and you look at, and depending what angle you're standing on, and you look at the campus, and you look at the farthest building, you're gonna see some really great examples of line also. Um, let's say that you're looking at your chest drawer and you imagine that the handles for the drawers were not there, but then you see where the drawers, let's say you have like a set of three, that's a good example of line. So just think about where you would see that. Example of plane. So if you're standing out in the horizon, okay, and a lot of times, let's say that you're standing in a hallway, right? You're dead center in a hallway, or one of those long hallways at at any of the colleges. If you were gonna look, okay, and just maybe move your phone down a little bit, you will create this imaginary point where it's a perspective where you imagine all these lines come out, as an example, like the line for the ceiling, the line for the floor. Okay, like look, if you look at this example right here, it's like looking in the horizon. I think so many of you have, if you have done that, even like a White Rock Lake, when you walk out in the dock and you're standing right here, this is going to look like everything comes to a point, because everything comes to that perspective, that imaginary point. This makes it an example of plane. A lot of times, let's say you're standing in a hallway at school and you move and you're not completely centered, and you kind of slant your phone and you're looking at that far as you can look, that would be an example of plane right there. So yes, it comes to a point in here, but this is an example of plane. If you look at, a lot of times you have to create these examples. So if you look as an example, let me think of something else. Buildings. Let's say that you're at the bottom, you're on the main floor, but you're in the city. Say you go to downtown Dallas, right? And you look up straight up to some of those tallest buildings. And depending on how you angle your camera phone, you can imagine that the lines in the buildings come together, and you may just be able to capture that with your camera phone, and that's an example of plane. So this is really important because basically everything around us is created by point, line, and plane. And a point really begins everything because point can create lines, lines can create planes. So, and if you need to be a little bit more obvious, it's like if you really want a good exercise, like I said, do this assignment on the fall where they take the camera phone and I go take pictures and I have to crop them in a square mode. It really helps you and helps you imagine the creativity. It's like looking also at a really, really long table and just putting your camera phone just in the right angle. So when the end of the table almost looks like it's coming out in a point, and it looks like almost has lines that come right at you. So think of that. Let's see here. So I also recommend that you guys read through this. Um, this is this is kind of fun. It's just kind of remember when I said like people don't a lot of people don't read, so even you have to communicate. So if I give you the word anxiety as an example, what would you do to that word, and how would you communicate without using typography, but without using some kind of effect? How would you make that into anxiety? So then what they did, it looks like they put a bunch of needles in here and created the word anxiety. How do you create the word tension? And it communicates the meaning of the word. So not only do you have to write something, but also the word has to communicate its meaning. And tension is a really good example. Look at the example above here. All the lines across just makes it look chaotic and creating that tension. This is a good example of hope down here, like hope fades type of thing, or hope comes together. Look at the example of fear. Let's scroll down. I'm just kind of jumping over this. Um, I do recommend that you look at some of these pages. Touches on the principle of design, rhythm, and balance, especially what you guys do in your series right now. Um, Really good example of symmetry and asymmetry. Symmetry, remember, you can take the piece of paper and fold it in half, and everything on the left is the same as the right. But so if you have those three dots here, all lined up, spaces between the dots or the circle is exactly how would you take that and give an example of that is not symmetrical. So and then here's another example of symmetry versus asymmetry. Symmetry versus asymmetry. So the book is very inspiring, and it does really help you understand uh, rhythm and time, repetition and change here, and then some really good examples of layouts. Scaling. When you're a little kid, you tend to draw the house and the tree. Obviously, you may draw the tree a little bit bigger, and then you do the house. If you think back of that very first picture that you ever did, okay, and you probably did everything about the size, the exact same size. But think about how when you started getting older, and you were probably like kinder, first grade, and they talk to you about scaling, right? So the tree is going to be not all the time, but Let's say that the tree is a lot taller than the house. The house is going to be taller than you, and then you have to draw yourself a little smaller, and then the sun is bigger than anything else, but then how do you make that look bigger? So this is where scaling becomes important. You do have to think about those elements in proportion to one another. More examples of layout and design here. Some really great examples here. Scaling letter forms, which, by the way, you should never do this and you should never do this. But at the same time, there's always an exception to the rule. And the exception is that it just has to make sense. If you're going to stretch out type, it needs to make sense. There needs to be a reason why you're doing it. If you're going to widen the type, again, there needs to be a reason of why you're doing it. If there's no reason, if you just do it because you're just lazy and you don't want to find another typeface, then it's going to look like a mistake. So there's an intention in design for everything that you do. Okay, because there's gotta be a flow between your typography, your layout, and your design. Everything has to work together. So kind of keep that in mind. Let's keep moving on. Talks about texture over here and how do you create that, and then and it becomes part of your design as a principle of design. And you've seen this where it becomes really fun when you create faces with type. So you're just gonna see some examples on that. Um, Painting letters. Examples of color. And this is important because when you're looking at the color wheel and it's mostly primary colors and how they work, a lot of times when you're a young designer, either you're feeling lazy and you are looking at colors, you will just grab whatever the bright yellow. But remember, there are multiples amounts of yellow. And I'm going to do a video on colors and the PMS books for you so you can understand it and understand how that works in design. So take a look at all this. Great information on color. Great information here on designing with color. Examples of different applications of color on packaging. Different application of texture. How this right here and this right here you actually create. Like, I've always been fascinated by fabric design. More information on Gestalt principles here, which come in handy. Just really awesome information. Why it talks about why white space is good and why it works. And I mentioned it before that a lot of people are really afraid of white space. So I'm going to leave it here, not to overwhelm you with a lot of information. But I do want you to take some time to look at your book as you're working on these assignments, because they're only going to make you stronger. And they're going to spark different ideas. And I guess, again, the best way to find the assignment, do you remember to that first... at the very first email that I sent you, then remember that you can find your emails all under the homepage under announcements, and then you scroll all the way down, and this is the link to download your book. So I like to keep my book on my desktop, and then you can also use your iPad and read and refer back to your book whenever you want to. You can also, of course, we talked about it, you can also get it from your learning materials. But again, I just like to have it to be able to use it whenever I want. So that's what I recommend. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.